All right, we are now recording and now we're going to get started. So thanks everyone for joining. Apologies again for starting a few minutes late. This is Mary Cannon, Director of AmeriCorps with Serve Ohio. I'll be facilitating the presentation today. The webinar is going to be focused on the current funding opportunity for fiscal year 20, which would start this fall for programming. And there's quite a few materials that I'll be referencing throughout the conversation that are currently available on our website. But first, let's just do a real quick introduction to Serve Ohio, just so everyone's on the same page. So we are Ohio's Commission on Service and Volunteerism. We are charged with strengthening Ohio's communities through AmeriCorps and volunteer engagement. We are one program, or AmeriCorps is one program of CNCS, the Corporation for National and Community Service. That's our federal funding partner. So AmeriCorps grants are federal grants. They engage more than 80,000 Americans across the country in a term of national service. CNCS also administers other funding opportunities through Senior Corps and the Volunteer Generation Fund, for example. So Serve Ohio, we were created. We've just recently celebrated our 25th anniversary. We were created under the Federal National Community Service Trust Act. That legislation created CNCS and pulled some national service programs all under one umbrella, under AmeriCorps and also Senior Corps. So through our collaborations and partnerships, we administer funding that targets areas of education, economic opportunity, healthy futures, veterans, military families, environmental stewardship, and disaster services. And I'll talk a little bit more about those focus areas throughout the conversation. So in the current program year of 1920, more than $8 million is supporting 26 partner organizations and just over 900 AmeriCorps members. And those programs and members leverage millions in local, state, public, and private support. You can follow that link to our website that has a link or a map, a Google map of all of our service locations across the state, which is more than 500 locations across the state of Ohio. All right, so what can Ohio AmeriCorps programs do? Well, they can address a diverse set of community needs, for example, health-related activities, employment-related needs, education-related needs. AmeriCorps programs, really the pinnacle are the members. The AmeriCorps members are the ones who provide the direct service activities. I like to call them our boots on the ground in the community, providing those activities, those interventions, that information, that education, for example. So who are the AmeriCorps members? They are not a volunteer or staff person, but someone who has been contracted and agreed to a term of national service, and those terms can vary in length based on hours, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But anywhere from 300 hours to 1,700 hours a member can contribute and commit to up to a year. They have to be a U.S. citizen, a legal permanent resident. They have to be at least 17 years of age. If they they have to have a parent or guardian signature, but there's no upper age limit in terms of AmeriCorps requirements. Programming and programs can set elements around age based on the need of the population to receive the services. So, for example, if a program was creating a senior to senior peer program, you could set some parameters around the ages of members. But from an AmeriCorps standpoint, there is no upper age limit. We have members actually serving. We have one member in Central Ohio who's serving and she's in her 80s. So no upper age limit. The AmeriCorps members, they receive what's called an Eli Siegel Educational Award. So if they successfully complete their term of service, they get an educational award that they can use to pay off existing school loans or go back to school. They have 7 years to use it, so it's you can think of it as a scholarship, similar to a scholarship. It's similar to a Pell Award. They have up to 7 years to use that for a variety of education-related expenses. So it's a nice benefit for those AmeriCorps members. And then if they're serving full-time, they also are eligible to receive health care, and based on their personal circumstances, may be eligible for child care if they have dependents. And then they receive a modest living allowance. It's a stipend that is provided to them for some basic necessities during their service term. They must meet eligibility criteria. There are background checks that all AmeriCorps members must complete. And then if there's other eligibility criteria based on program requirements in terms of the service location or the organization that's overseeing the program, if they have certain criteria, that can also be part of the eligibility as well. And these are individuals who get things done in their community. They're charged with very specific directions and details and instructions and interventions, and they are the ones that go out into the specific targeted areas, which can be literally a neighborhood or a city or a county or a region or the entire state, but they're individuals that get things done in their community. So who's eligible for an Ohio AmeriCorps grant? Nonprofit institutions, institutions of higher ed. We have a lot of partnerships with higher ed institutions across the state, government entities. We have other state agencies. We have other local governments. Indian tribes are available, and a very common model for us are partnerships or consortiums or intermediaries, however you view them, in which an entity partners with like mission organizations or other partners in their community, and in a collaborative effort, engage the members and deploy those members amongst their partners. So that's a very common model. So if you are an organization that would like to operate solely within the state of Ohio, you have to apply us for an Ohio AmeriCorps grant. Anyone who wants to place members in multiple states must apply directly to our federal funder, CNCS, and that link will take you there to learn more about their application process. That process for the 2020 for national directs, what's called multi-state or national direct applicants, that process is actually closed for 2020, so more information will be available in the fall if you are a multi-state applicant. Okay, so I am going to try to unmute and see how that works. Does anyone have any questions at this time? Hopefully this is all information you probably have heard before. Not hearing anything, we're going to, and I don't see anything in the chat box, so I'm going to start getting into the real content of the dialogue today. In front of you, you see a list of application documents. All of these pieces of information are important. So we're going to focus on three pieces that are highlighted right now: the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, the application instructions, and the Mandatory Supplemental Guidance, or lovingly called MSG, which is literally just a glossary of terms and definitions related to our AmeriCorps world and vernacular. So all of this information is on our website. Let me see if I can show you where that is. So this is our grants funding page. All of the materials are under this current funding available. So if you scroll down, this will be the focus of our, this will be the focus of our conversation today. All this information is up here now, so feel free to reference it throughout the dialogue. Hopefully you've looked at least at the Notice of Funding and the application instructions prior to today, because we're going to dive into those pieces. So now that you know where those are, let me go back to the presentation and we'll continue. All right, so the notice of funding opportunity. One of the first things you'll see when you open the document is a little bit about what I just shared in terms of program or purpose of AmeriCorps funding. And the next thing you'll see is funding priorities. So this is on pages 1 and 2. They are economic opportunity, and underneath that focus area of economic opportunity, we've identified some very specific interventions that have been demonstrated some evidence to support their program design, and those are listed in that CNCS evidence exchange document. It's not a long document, it's about 4 pages long, and you can go to that to see if any of your program mirrors or replicates any of those interventions. We also are looking for programming that helps to increase economic opportunities for communities by preparing people for the workforce, so increasing employability, reducing employment barriers, and then increasing access, information, and or resources to safe, healthy, affordable housing and or making it more efficient housing. Education, there are specific evidence-based interventions on another document linked here that would support early education, K through 12 success, and post-secondary support. So any of those listed on that evidence exchange. Healthy futures. So there's another document with healthy futures related interventions around nutrition, for example, and physical education, for example, but also reducing and or preventing prescription drug and opioid abuse, and in general, increasing access to health information, knowledge, resource, and or services. And that health topic can vary. It can actually be around prescription drug and opioid abuse, or it can be around other health-related topics that are needed in your community. So they're pretty vague and broad. And then we have a specific interest in supporting veterans and military families, so helping them improve their quality of life. So rural intermediaries, that's really a program design, so looking at how we can support our rural communities by supporting intermediaries or consortiums or partnership models to help support rural communities. And that's really a program model that rural intermediary can fall within those other focus areas, such as opioid or prescription prevention work or healthy futures work. So they can overlap. There's certainly an opportunity that you can overlap in terms of funding priorities here. And then if there's any faith-based organizations that are looking to provide any of the above interventions. So those are the funding priorities for this current notice of funding opportunity. Note, you do not have to fit within a priority in order to apply. So you do not have to match or claim stake to any of these funding priorities in order to apply. So just keep that in mind as we move through the dialogue today. Okay, now we're going to get into the actual application elements. So this is the elements that you would actually put into an application if you're requesting resources from us. This starts on page 15 of the notice of funding. This is all taken from the document. So it literally tells you step by step and bullet point by bullet point what elements need to be included in the narrative components of a complete application. So I'm going to go through these pieces, and then if you have any questions, I'll pause and we'll have any dialogue if at all needed. But know that all of this is pulled directly from the notice of funding, and it's under the application review information starting on page 15 of the notice of funding. The first thing you'll see is the executive summary. There is a template that is provided. It says, please fill in the blanks of these sentences to complete the executive summary. Do not deviate from the template below. So what does that mean? All you would have to do is cut and paste and fill in the information for your program and organization within the parentheses. So very simple. Use the template provided. Section B goes on to talk about the program design, and this is where you start talking about your program elements. One of the, I guess, specific pieces to AmeriCorps is the theory of change. And so this is where you'll start talking about your program's approach. And it has three primary descriptive elements. There's the need, so you talk about the community or community's needs that you are trying to address. There's a word called intervention, and that is what the AmeriCorps members will do. What are the intervention or interventions the AmeriCorps members will do to address the need? And as a result of those interventions or intervention, what is the outcome or expected positive change that you expect to see in those communities? So it's just the normal narrative pieces of documenting the need you're trying to address, what the members will do to address the need, and what do you anticipate to be the outcome from those interventions. The next piece is the logic model, and it's actually a companion piece to the theory of change. So the logic model, if you have not done a logic model or you do not have a logic model for your program or organization, I recommend starting to examine that because it is a required piece of the application. There's a couple of links here that takes you to two CNCS developed presentations on how to develop a program logic model. And then there's actually a template on the website that you can fill in the blank. So a logic model is just a linear representation of what you put in the theory of change. So they should be complementary and companion pieces within your program. And the logic model needs to be specific to your AmeriCorps program, not your organization. So you may have an organizational logic model. The logic model needs to be representative of what's in your program request. So make sure that if you have an organizational logic model, you may need to put a little work into creating a program logic model. The next section is the evidence base, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on the next page. But just know that the evidence base is how you support your decision on how you developed your program. So it needs to support and reference research and evaluation based on the proposed program in the application. The next item you'll put in your application is notice priority. It's a very minimal response is needed. You do not need to put much information in that. It literally is no more than 2 or 3 sentences is necessary in this section. You would specifically state the funding priority and that the program meets all the requirements of the funding priority. If the application does not align with a funding priority, please include one sentence stating no NOFO priority area. So that's a very simple piece. Don't spend too much time on that. And then the next section is member experience. So going back to my previous slide around the members, it's the members that are the unique component of our material, of our grant applications and our funding. So thinking through the AmeriCorps experience, what skills will the AmeriCorps members gain as a result of their service? What training and professional development will they receive? How will you or will you recruit members from perhaps the geographic or demographic communities in which the programs will operate? And then thinking about how to foster an inclusive service culture. So thinking from a member, putting yourself in the shoes of an AmeriCorps member, what would that experience look like? So let me go to the next slide, which talks about the evidence base. This is a very technical section, and this is where you're going to have to go also look in the MSG, or the Mandatory Supplemental Guidance. There's more information around the evidence base. So this is to assess an applicant's evidence to support the intervention described in the application. So this will vary based on the kind of the history of your program. So if you're looking at creating a new program, something that you've never done before or doesn't exist currently, then you're going to talk about how you've used the most recent and relevant evidence to inform your program design. Most new programs will be in what's called pre-preliminary, meaning it's evidence informed. They haven't done, they've done their due diligence on informing their program with evidence of relevant or and recent information, but they have not conducted any evaluation. You have not conducted any evaluation or on the program in the application. Now, if you're looking at replicating or expanding or scaling a program that perhaps already exists, or you would like to adopt into your organization, perhaps then you have some evidence and research to back the intervention as being successful. So, and then you would look at that type of evaluation and research you have, and if you have outcome studies related to the same intervention in the application, you likely have what's called preliminary tiered evidence, and then the other two, number 3 and 4, which are moderate and strong evidence, that really requires scientific based evaluation, like a random control trial or a quasi-experimental design. So if that is the case, then you could possibly select moderate or strong based on the type of evaluation that was done. But generally speaking, most AmeriCorps programs, particularly new AmeriCorps programs, will be in pre-preliminary or perhaps preliminary level of evidence. I'm not going to go too much more in depth around these pieces. My best recommendation is to review the notice of funding and the mandatory supplemental guidance. And if you have any questions on what you think your evidence tier is, then we can have that conversation, but it's very specific to each program. So it's hard to have a real detailed conversation around these pieces here today, but I'm happy to follow up if you need more information, or if you feel that you just want to confirm what you think your program's evidence tier is. Now, so this is a very technical section. Please don't let it deter you from applying. Please don't it is not a requirement to be in the moderate or strong evidence tiers to receive funding. We have programming in all of those levels. So just know that it's just about recognizing where you are on the spectrum of evidence. All right, I don't see any questions in the chat box. Thanks for that. Hunter said the deadline. Yeah, you must have gotten the wrong link. I'll send that to you. This is all, the deadline is April 8th, 2020. So it is on our website. So it may have just been linked from the wrong page. So no problem. We'll get that to you. Thanks, Hunter. Okay, so we're going to move on. So we've talked about the program design elements within the notice of funding. There's 4 sections. The theory of change, the logic model. There's a really one section, the theory of change and logic model. The evidence base, The notice priority in the member experience. All right, we are moving on to the next section, which is organizational capability. So this is the section where you will highlight your organization's capacity in order to operate and manage the proposed AmeriCorps program. So the first section is around the background and staffing. So you'll list, the organization's details in terms of the roles, responsibilities, and structure of the staff that will be implementing the program, as well as who will be providing oversight and monitoring the program. So you don't have to put names in there, but perhaps positions or departments could be included there. Compliance and accountability. The organization has a plan of oversight and monitoring. So this will look a little different based on your program design and model. So if you have a program request, a grant request for a program that will be, under quote unquote one roof, perhaps only operating within your organization, that, monitoring and oversight plan could look significantly different than an organization that has partners or a intermediary model, or even a program that is functioning statewide. So this should really be representative of how your program will be monitored as described in the previous section. Culture that values learning. So this is saying how the organization's management, board, and or staff collect and currently use information, including performance data for learning and decision making, and then how will you incorporate the AmeriCorps piece into that process? If that process doesn't already exist, how could you start using performance data, and where and with whom to inform your program? Then there's member supervision. So again, the member component is the unique element of our funding opportunity. So we want to make sure that the AmeriCorps members receive sufficient guidance and consistent support from their supervisors to provide effective service. Now this again will also look different based on your program model. So if it's all quote unquote in-house and only within your organization, that supervision plan and oversight will look very different as opposed to a larger, geographically dispersed program model. So taking those pieces into consideration are important, and we want to make sure that supervisors will be trained and prepared to follow AmeriCorps program regulations, priorities, and expectations. So talking about when supervisors will receive orientation to the program, when they will receive training around what the members should be doing in their communities, and the ongoing touch points throughout the program year. All right. Next section is cost effectiveness and budget adequacy. And this is one of the easiest sections narratively that you will fill out, because all you need to include in this section is what's highlighted there, the C budget. That is literally the only required narrative. You do not need to put anything else there. However, if you would like some space to perhaps elaborate on budget elements or line items in your budget, you can use this space here. I caution you, there's not a lot of space available, but if you need to highlight something within your budget or want to reference something in your budget, you can use this section. However, all that is required is C budget. The next section is the evaluation plan, and this will differ based on whether you're applying for the first time or a subsequent time. For new applicants, if you are submitting your initial request, you need to include a data collection plan here. There's two pieces on page 20, two bullet points, a description of the applicant's data collection plan, or if you don't have a current data collection plan, how you will create and implement one. And then you would also describe how you plan to use the data collected to improve your program in the first 3 years of funding. Within the grant application system, which is called eGrants, and we'll look at that a little bit later, you'll see other narrative pieces around that are identified as amendment, justification, clarification, information, and continuation changes. All you have to do is enter NA into those fields. You do need to put something in those fields, though, or else you cannot submit the application. If you are submitting, if you are an organization who has received AmeriCorps funding in the past or currently receives AmeriCorps funding, in the evaluation plan section, you actually have to submit your evaluation plan, and those elements are listed on page 21 of the notice of funding. There's about 9 bullet points of the pieces of information that need to be included in your evaluation plan, so please refer to that and let me know if you have any questions. But for new applicants, a data collection plan is sufficient. Okay. From a narrative standpoint, that is everything that's required from a narrative or text component of your application. Those are all the required sections from a narrative standpoint. You also need to include some additional documentation, primarily if you are a new applicant. So if you turn to pages 14 and 15 of the notice of funding, you'll see elements there, and it will depend on the type of applicant you are. All applicants, regardless of years of funding or if you're new, must send in any evaluation reports or studies to support your evidence-based section. That's that evidence tier. New organizations need to also submit an organizational chart that includes the AmeriCorps program entered onto the chart. Then letters of support. Perhaps if you're a rural intermediary, you have to submit a letter of support from all of your consortium members, and those letters should be addressed to you as the applicant. And then new and recompeting applicants have to submit the financial management survey, and I'll go over that a little bit later, but that is an additional piece of documentation that relates to your organization's fiscal capacity to implement the federal grant. So I'll show you that in just a moment, but those are the additional documentations. Those are sent outside of the application system, the eGrant system. All additional documentations actually come to me via email by the application deadline. These are required pieces, so if they come in late, your application is late and may not be considered for funding. So you have to submit not only the grant application within the online system, but additional documentation also needs to come to me by the application deadline. So Bridget asked if we are not a new applicant, but we are seeking assistance for a new program, do we need to submit a new evaluation data collection plan? You would submit a data collection plan in that scenario, because it all relates to the project in which you're asking for support. And Shannon asked, so this is new or new and recompeting? Shannon, that for recompeting, that would be evaluation report and also the financial management survey for recompeting. Go to page 14 of the notice of funding, and it tells you exactly what you need to include based on your status as an applicant, whether you're new or recompeting. But for recompeting, it's evaluation and the financial management survey. And if you're considering yourself a rural intermediary, Shannon, you would also need to provide letters of support. All right, thanks, great. Good questions. Thanks for putting everything in the chat box, I appreciate it. Okay, there are two other elements within a grant application. These are in, now we're going to switch to the instructions. So everything that I just went over is in the Notice of Funding, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO document. We're going to switch over now to the other document, the application instructions. This provides the technical directions on how to put together two pieces of information. So not only does your application include some narrative pieces and maybe and some additional documentation, but there's performance measures. So with your request for application, you'll include at least one performance measure. So we use outcome-based reporting requirements. So, and this relates to 1 year of service. So when you submit a request, you would submit targets for an output and an outcome for 1 year. So within, no more than 12 months of operating your grant, if funded, what would you demonstrate as success on your grant? And your targets will be set for 1 year. I'm going to go over this in much more detail at the March 4th grant workshop that all of you are invited to attend. We will spend a good amount of time looking at performance measures and how to construct them and how to determine what best represents a good output and outcome for your program. In the meantime, I want you to review the application instructions, which are linked here. And the other document is the National Performance Measure. So CNCS has created some standardized indicators to use as outputs and outcomes, and they're based on your focus area. And we'll go through those national performance measures in much more detail at the grant workshop. There's just not enough time to go through these pieces all on a webinar today. And it allows in-person technical assistance and lots of time for question and dialogue. So please come to the March 4th grant workshop. And prior to that, look at the National Performance Measure instructions and the application instructions. The other piece that we'll spend significant amount of time on at the grant workshop is the budget. So like the performance measure targets, your budget that you submit with your grant request is for 1 year only. It is not for 3 years. It is a 1 year budget. So thinking about all the resources you need for 1 year of operating your grant request, that's what you submit in your budget. The budget instructions are very detailed and very specific, and they're listed in the application instructions. Follow the instructions. It tells you exactly what you need to put where, and we will segment the budget out and all the required elements at the March 4th grant workshop. Okay, good question. Budget is for 1 year, but the application is for 3 years. Technically, the application is for 1 year, but you talk about what you would achieve in a 3-year funding or grant cycle. So the budget is for 1 year. Years, we do 3-year grant cycles. Budget or grant cycles year 2 and 3 are continuation requests. And those require submissions of new budgets and new performance measures. So there's some pieces that are done annually if funding is received, but every 3 years you submit a large request, and you can approach it from, this is what we want to accomplish over the next 3 years, but you will only include targets in your budget for 1 year. So you can reference and include in like your logic model and your program design what you hope to accomplish in 3 years, but there's some pieces that will be only annual, and that includes your performance measures and your budget instructions. Okay, so in terms of the budget, your grant will include a request within the budget that will have a specific number of AmeriCorps member positions and slot types. So going back to the introductory slides, I talked about what is an AmeriCorps member. An AmeriCorps member is someone who commits to a term of national service, and they can serve a variety of slot types, anywhere from 300 hours to 1,700 hours. And this is how this breaks down. And let me give you some context to why this is like this. Our AmeriCorps grants are very flexible, and the idea is to deploy or be very intentional and specific on when and how you provide the AmeriCorps resource. So you need to be considerate or think about how and when and where the need exists. So if the need could be addressed all year long, over 12 months of time, then you could typically engage a full-time AmeriCorps member. And that full-time AmeriCorps member needs to contribute at least 1,700 hours. That's the minimum number of hours they have to contribute to their service year. If perhaps there's the need you're trying to address is only in the summer, then you can look at engaging AmeriCorps members in quarter time or minimum time slots, which only require 450 or 300 hours over over that time frame. If you have a need that only exists after school, so during an academic calendar, there's the 3/4 time slot. That's 1,200 hours. So you'll also see reference to an MSY associated with each of those slot types. So one MSY is the equivalent of a full-time AmeriCorps member, and you can think of MSY as FTE, if you will, but they're not employees, so we don't call them FTE, we call them member service year. So one full-time AmeriCorps member is one MSY, and 3/4 time is a 0.7, a half-time slot is a 0.5, and so on. So thinking about when and where and how much time or service is needed to address the need, you can create a program around these specific slot types. So let's say, for example, and just for very simple math, note this is not a valid request, but let's say I have a program that needs a full-time member, one half-time, one quarter-time, and one minimum time member. Well, then my grant request is asking for 4 total member slots that would equal 1.977 member service years. Again, that's not an eligible request, but just for simple math, that shows you that you can request a variety of slot types and be very intentional on the number of each slot type and when they're serving. What do programs use if they want some summer-only terms? Yes, generally speaking, Shannon, that's where the quarter time and the minimum time come in. The quarter time would require more of a full-time commitment over the summer. Like, so if you wanted someone to serve, 40 hours for 10 weeks or something like that, that could be accomplished there. Or if you wanted maybe on a lesser commitment, maybe 300 hours. It just depends on when the summer would start, whether you're starting, in May or August, or going to August or September. So those are the 2 slots that generally are associated with summer-only programming. Because you're welcome. You can do that. You can, if you want to have, we have programming that engages only full-time members. We have program that engages only quarter time, only half-time. We have programming that does some full-time, some half-time. It just depends on when and how you want to, A, address the need, and B, engage those members. So those two pieces should line up. And we'll talk a lot more about this in March, excuse me. So there's a question about guidelines on what is and is not an eligible request. So there just needs to be a rationale on why you are requesting those slot types. So if you're requesting half-time members, you need to say, we're requesting half-time members because the need can only be addressed a certain amount of time of week or certain amount of time of the year. So there needs to be some rationale on how and why you're requesting those slot types. Now for the current program or notice of funding, you have to request at least 5 MSY. And that can be done through mixing and matching or all of the same MSYs or slot types, or in partnership with other programs. So you can be very creative again on how you engage the members and when you engage the members. But it needs to be evident through your grant request that you've put some thought into why. So if you're requesting 50 full-time AmeriCorps members, there needs to be some thought on how you would engage all of those AmeriCorps members. If you're engaging 10 full-time AmeriCorps members, that's 17,000 hours of service that they all need to contribute to your grant, or in your program. So thinking through how and when those members would be engaged is very important. So let me give you an example, a much more eligible request. There is what's called a cost per MSY, or maximum cost per MSY, cannot exceed more than $15,479. So if you're requesting let's say you're requesting 10 member service years, the most that you can request to support those 10 MSYs, whether that's 10 full-time or 20 half-time or 40 quarter-time, the most you can request to support each of those MSYs is $15,479, which means your maximum federal request can be just under $155,000. There is a grant or cost share that all applicants have to contribute to, and it's based on how many years of funding you've received Ohio AmeriCorps grant funding. If this is your first year, your first grant cycle, you have to match at least 24%. So let's assume you're a new applicant. So this scenario is saying your match requirement is 24%. So your shares would be just under $50,000 for a total grant amount of just over $200,000. Again, the federal share and your share is the total amount. And the federal share can be no more than the 76% because you have to contribute at least 24% in your first 3 years. I'm going to pause there just to take a breath for a second, see if anybody has any questions. Shannon, what was the MSY last year again? You mean the cost per MSY, or what was the Shannon, can you clarify your question? Oh, the maximum. It was 15 something. I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact. I don't want to give you the wrong number. I'll get back to you, Shannon. Okay. All right. At the grant workshop, we will go over the budget piece in much more detail. So please come to the grant workshop. Unfortunately, that's not anything that I have the capabilities to do a live stream or record. So, but I do post the presentation materials on our website, but it is very helpful for new applicants to attend. Okay. There's two types of budgets or grants that you could request, and it depends on your status as an applicant. Anyone is eligible to submit a cost reimbursement grant or budget, which means you have the 24% matching requirement. It does require submission of a budget and financial reporting, and then the grant is made via reimbursement. So as the name describes, it is a reimbursement grant. So payments are reimbursed based on approved budget expenditures. You must abide by that cost per MSY, and then the amount that you can request is directly tied to how many members. And for any AmeriCorps grant, funds are not for general organizational expenses. These are for supporting your program and the members, and the budget has to request no less than 5 MSY. There are also fixed cost grants or fixed cost budgets, and these are specific to the type of applicant. So on page 4 of the notice of funding, there's a chart, and it tells you what kind of grant types each applicant is eligible for and the varying distinctions between those two. If you are a new applicant, you cannot request a fixed cost grant or a fixed amount grant, a full cost fixed amount grant, but there's other opportunities for fixed amount grants that you can request. So we can have that conversation offline, but know that if you're requesting what's called a full cost grant, meaning you're requesting that maximum cost per MSY of $15,479, new applicants cannot request that. You'd have to do that via a cost reimbursement request. However, fixed cost grants are can be ideal in return, and they have no matching requirements. However, the funds available to those fixed cost grants are dependent on member enrollment and retention. It is, as I said, limited to certain applicants. Those funds, similar to cost reimbursement grants, those funds are directly tied to a specific number of members and are also not for general organizational expenses and must request no less than 5 MSYs. Oh, so Karen has a question. This is a great question, so let me clarify this. In the cost reimbursement grant, the amount submitted for the grant can only be for payment of member salaries or their stipends, no other expenses to support the program. No, no, no. You can allocate those resources, the grant amount that you're requesting, and however you want those dollars to be expended to support your program. So by line, and you would do that by line item, essentially saying, you know, we want to use the grant funds to pay for X, Y, and Z, and we'll use matching dollars to pay for the member salaries or stipends. You could do that. It doesn't say 95% of the time, though, the grants go to support the member stipends and related member support costs, but you don't have to use the grant resources specifically just for the member stipends. So the member stipends need to be in the grant, doesn't mean you have to use the exact grant resources. So you'll identify how you're using or what you're using to pay for those stipends, whether it's match or grant dollars. Great, you're welcome. Okay, I get that question a lot. All right. Fixed cost grants. Okay, so that hopefully gave you an overview of some budgeting elements. That's a great place to start. in terms of starting to think through a budget, there are some important pieces that I just want to kind of pull out for you. E-grants. E-grants is the online grants management system that we use to submit. Even though it is a federal grant, we do not use grants.gov. So please go in and create an e-grants account, even if you're just considering, or maybe in the future we'll be submitting for any sort of AmeriCorps funding, you'll need an e-grants account. Follow this link and it will take you to that process. It's not a significant process in terms of time. However, in order to create that e-grants account, you have to have an active SAM and DUNS registration. So if you don't have that, you need to do that ASAP, because those are two pieces that are absolutely required to create and receive funding, to create an e-grants account and receive funding. So get a DUNS number and then register with the System of Awards Management, or SAM. There are some page limitations considering all the pieces that you have to put in the grant. There's the narrative requirement on page 8 in the notice of funding. So thinking through all those pieces that we talked about earlier, the narrative piece in terms of page limitations must not exceed 10 double-spaced pages. That doesn't include the budget or the performance measures or any required additional documentation. And then the logic model cannot be any more than 3 pages when you print it out. And this is all based on the system generation of pages. So while we recommend creating a logic model out of your own and then putting it in the system, we recommend, doing a Word doc or something that you can do, put all the pieces together and then paste perhaps in the system. It's those lengths of documents usually don't line up. So make sure that you don't exceed the requirements once it's in the system, once it's in eGrants. And then make sure you do submit the grant via eGrants and any additional documentation to me via email by the deadline. All right, we're going to stop there. We are about at the 1 hour mark. So I just unmuted the line. Do we have any questions on the phone? Okay, no problem. We'll come back after I go over the next pieces and I'll open the lines again, but feel free to keep putting things in the chat box as well. Oh, and Shannon, this is something we talk about at the grant workshop, but she said don't use if you do create any sort of lists or bullet points or anything outside of the eGrant system and then you want to try to cut and paste. She said don't use bullets, use the little asterisk, it copy and paste better. Yes, it does. Thank you, Shannon. And those little like tips and pros and things we talk a lot about at the grant workshop. Excellent. Okay, now we're going to talk about 2 pieces of information, the intent to apply and the financial management survey. The intent to apply is not required. However, if you are a new applicant, it does give you the benefit of submitting an intent to apply is I give you feedback about your program. So while it's not required, it does give you feedback from me around your program design. And I'm pulling it up actually really quickly here. So for anyone on the phone who's current or past recipient of funding, it has been required in the past. It is no longer required. It is, if you would like feedback, it is that would be need to be submitted by March 25th to receive feedback. but I'm going to scroll, and apologies for the quick scroll. It's never fun to watch on a webinar, but the program narrative. So this is the piece that you would get feedback on if you were a new applicant and submitted this by March 25th. I would look at this information and give you guidance around like what isn't clear, what maybe you're proposing would be not or out of compliance in terms of AmeriCorps regulations or prohibited activities. So you can fill out these 9 questions as much as you know at the time of submission, and I will provide some general feedback around things to consider, things to think through. So it's a resource for you as a new applicant. Again, it is not required by any means. Now, the financial management survey, that is required. And let me pull that up. It has been significantly streamlined from past years. So if you are returning, oops, I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way, returning applicant, this is asking you questions around your general organizational information, but then down here talking about operational management, and it's just drop downs, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. So I would have your team look at this and send this to your fiscal department or contact to fill out. It's related to your operations and financial management that you currently do in your organization. It's only 2 pages, and then you submit this to us, save and submit to me as part of your additional documentation. So that is required for all new and renewal applicants. Okay. Those are on our website at the grants funding page. So let me just move on, and we'll, I only have a few more slides left, and then we'll go from there. So just thinking through, perhaps taking that intent to apply and going through those questions and thinking about, are you mission ready? Is your organization ready? Do you have the capacity to operate the program? Do you have the matching funds? Do you have the resources until reimbursement is provided? Can you provide the programmatic and fiscal federal reporting requirements? Thinking about what the research says. What questions can you not answer on the intent to apply? And I mentioned prohibited activities earlier. There's actually a very specific list of things that AmeriCorps programs and members are not allowed to do as a federal grant. I'm sure you're perhaps familiar with things like voter registration drives and whatnot. Make sure you're not asking programs or your members to do any of those. And then, are you looking to replicate or displace current staff or volunteers? That's not our goal here. We want you to build upon, fill in gaps, provide value added, put in pieces that are perhaps missing or could improve services. So that's what we want you to think about. Can you then recruit and retain and manage the number of members in MSY? We do have a recommendation that there's at least a 0.5 FTE to oversee and administer the program. So in your budget, that's something you could include in your budget as staff time, either as match or as part of the grant or a combination thereof, to have at least a half-time person oversee and administer the program. Thinking through why AmeriCorps. You know, this is a very unique resource. So this is not a resource, this is an amazing resource. It's not always the most appropriate resource. So thinking through that, there's other AmeriCorps resources out there. There's other national service resources out there. So we can have that conversation as well. How will that, and then as I said earlier, how will this help you expand your reach, scale, scope, or improve efficiency and effectiveness? So just some reminders here. AmeriCorps grants expand the capacity of your organizations. You are responsible for recruiting, selecting, and supervising the members, or coming up with a supervisory plan. There are programmatic financial reporting. Our grants are not for individual placement. So these are not for organizations or partnerships or anyone to come and say, you know, we just want one member to help us do this. This is really a model of funding to support a community need. And grants must include at least of those 5 member service years. Again, that can be 5 full-time, 10 half-time, 40 quarter-time, you name it, or a mix or combination thereof. Okay, so thinking ahead, please plan to attend the grant workshop. If you're even considering or thinking through, it's a great resource. I have people come from all over to attend the grant workshop. You know, they come once, or maybe they come a couple of times and then submit a grant. It can be very beneficial for you and your organization. I do represent like a program person and perhaps a fiscal person to come to that. If you would like to come to that, it's in 3 weeks, so please RSVP to me. And then it is not required again. It's for feedback only, but the intent to apply can be submitted to me by March 25th. And then everything is due by April 8th in e-grants, as well as submitted to me, the additional documentation submitted to me via email. So there are some other resources. Everything is listed here on our AmeriCorps funding page, which is this page here. So if you go to serveohio.org, grants funding, AmeriCorps funding, this will take you here. Here's all the materials we discussed today. We will talk in much more detail around this 4th bullet point, the National Performance Measure instructions, and the application instructions for the budget and the grant workshop. Here's some technical assistance resources. So this is where I'll post today's presentation. The slides are already up here. Here is today's, oops, I'm so sorry. Apologies. This is the slides here from today. These are up, so you can reference these. And then I will also post the YouTube recording. It'll be a YouTube recording of today's presentation. So that is the conversation. I will open up the lines. Let's see if anyone has any questions. We've got 15 minutes. Thank you, Shannon. AmeriCorps does rock. The lines are open. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll stay on the line for a couple of minutes. Otherwise, that concludes our presentation. If you have any questions, there is my contact information. Feel free to email me or call me. We can set up a time to talk on the phone, or if you happen to be in Columbus, perhaps we could meet in person. I'm happy to do that as well. So thank you for spending your lunch hour and plus with me. Feel free to log off if you need to go, or if anyone has any questions, I'll stay on for the next couple of minutes. I hopefully will look forward to hearing from you soon. And thank you for your interest and support for National Service in Ohio. Have a great day.
So, if I heard correctly.
This is Mary, I'm here.